Good. Fearless here with Connect to Create. I'm from Fearless Stamp and Flair. And if you're not familiar with Connect to Create, maybe it's your first time watching or joining. It is a collaboration between a fellow demonstrator, Kathy Ondas, and a good friend. Kathy's from Simply Cards by Kathy. And each week, it's our goal to bring you a short video that shows you a new technique or maybe an oldie but goodie technique that you've forgotten about. And today I'm going to share with you Faded Water Stenciling. It's a fun technique. There are some tips and tricks that you kind of need to understand to have it turn out the way it's supposed to turn out. So I'll try to share those with you as we go through this. So let's go ahead and turn the camera down and get started. Okay, the first thing I want to talk to you about before we actually start the technique is the stencils that you used. I've played with this technique quite a bit. I taught it in one of my classes several months ago, and that was the first time I had tried it. And I learned that some stencils work better than others. At least for me, that was the case. And so I want to give you some tips and some tricks about choosing your stencil first before we get started. These are the stencils that are in our current annual catalog. They're called Artistic Mix stencils, and they kind of work together. So you have this one with the little flowers, I'll call it, and it fits behind this other one that is kind of like a trellis or a grid work, so you can use them together. We're not going to do that for today's video. And then the other two are a couple of plaids or checks, and they also will coordinate together. Now, what I found, of course, I went first to my current products, is that what seemed to work best is when I had a stencil that the spaces and the covered areas were similar in size. And the reason for that is because we use water, and the water tends to want to run a little bit behind the stencil if you get too much. If I have a large space and a small covered area, I need water for the covered space when I spritz, but since it's a larger area, that water also wants to run underneath. So I found that, sadly, these particular three stencils didn't work very well. And you can see none of them have spaces that equal covered areas. This one here, from our Artistic Mix stencils, worked fairly well, but on this one I have actually more covered space than I have open areas. And so it was hard to get the water to lift in the small spaces. I did play last week when I was preparing the cards for this video. I did play a bit with this one, and I'm going to show you how to get around that. I found a way that it's not the way I learned the technique or a way I was taught the technique, but it worked, and it worked with this particular stencil. So we're going to use that one first, actually, but I want to show you a couple of our retired stencils. This one here, you can see that the size of the space and the width of the covered areas are very similar. This is probably a 1/4 inch, and then the covered space is probably a 1/4 inch, open quarter, covered quarter. And this one I had the absolute best luck with. So I'm going to show you how to use this one as well, because we use the technique in a slightly modified version with this one. And this one, I will show it to you in the way that I was taught how to do it. I also made a card using this one. This is some bricks. This is retired as well. And this one also worked quite well. So I'll show you that card, and I used the same technique for this one as I did for this one, or I should say the same method of the technique for these two. And this one I used a little differently. I'm going to start with this one. So the first thing we do is we need watercolor paper, and we need to hold it down on our work surface somehow. You can hold it right onto here. That's fine. I'm going to use this little clipboard for today. It's plastic. It helps me move it around to lift it up a bit to help you see it better. So we want to hold that down fairly securely. And so I take some good old masking tape. You can use your washi tape, any kind of painter's tape, to just hold that down very firmly, okay? And then, now, because I'm doing that, these areas under the tape will not get the technique treatment. So start out with a piece that's larger than what you want your finish size to be. I always do that anyway, because then I can trim off pieces and use them to decorate the inside of my card or maybe even an envelope. So I always use a bigger piece and then trim it down to size. But it's particularly important if you don't want to use leftovers to decorate another area of the card. It is particularly important that then this be longer than your finished piece, because you won't have any technique under there. Then we're going to lay our stencil down over this, and I kind of like to pay attention to where I lay it, so that maybe I get a full image on it. It just depends on what you like. So I just kind of try to center it, make sure it's straight, and I take another piece of masking tape, and now we're going to tape this down only at the top. Okay, because we're not going to use this initially, and then we can flip this up out of the way and flip it back when we need it, and it will always be in the right place as we check through the various steps. So now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to take our ink pads and blending brushes. You could use sponge daubers. Excuse me, I think I need a drink of water. Okay, that's better. Too much talking, not enough showing, right? So I'm going to use Sweet Sorbet and Flirty Flamingo. And what I found works best is you do want colors that are more intense colors. Super pastel colors, I did not find to work as well. You want two colors, because we're going to create an ombre effect on here. So you want them either to coordinate or be darker and lighter than each other. Whatever colors you prefer will work. So now's the easy part. I'm just going to take my blending brush, and I'm going to lay down my first section of color. And think about working in thirds. Oh, that paper's got a weird, funny line on it. Oh, well, it'll work fine to show you how to do this. Now, we want this to get fairly intense here. So it takes a few tries. That's why I'm doing a little bit smaller piece of paper, so you don't have to watch me blend and blend and blend if I used my full 5.5 by 4 1/4 size. But I do want this to be pretty dark up here on the top. And like I said, do about a third, I guess, pretty close to a third. I thought about having this blending actually done before I started, so you didn't have to watch me do all the blending, but I was not sure if the ink were too dry, like if I did it last night or an hour or two before and got them done. If the ink was too dry, how well it would work. So I thought, well, you're just going to have to watch me blend. The other nice thing about this plastic clipboard, as you can see, I got ink on the outside of the edges, of course, but it's not on my work surface. So when I move it out of the way, I still have clean work surface. All right, just a little bit more up here near the top. And there's kind of a strange line. I don't know if you can see it. I don't really see it in my camera, but I can see it on the paper. It must be a a feature of the watercolor paper. Okay, we'll call that good. So that's where we're going to put the darkest color. I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to take my Flirty Flamingo, and I'm going to do the next third with Flirty Flamingo. And I want to make sure that I blend it into the Sweet Sorbet above. Just run it right through there. And we're trying to make an ombre effect. So it's going to go from darker to lighter. And again, this middle section with your lighter color, you want it to be fairly dark, fairly intense. If I ink up a little bit more frequently, it'll go a little faster. Okay. So that's pretty good for Flirty Flamingo. That looks ombre-ish, right? Now, rather than leave this completely white, what I like to add just a little color. So I kind of start up here and I just bring it down. I don't really want it colored, other than I want to get rid of that stark white color. So I'm not blending it much, but it is now not as white, and it's a little bit more Flirty Flamingo. So that concludes basically our first layer. Now we're going to flip over our second layer, or make our second layer. We're going to flip over our stencil, and I'm going to take that same Flirty Flamingo ink, and I am going to blend from approximately where the Flirty Flamingo was up top down, okay? Or perhaps halfway through the Flirty Flamingo. So we're going to blend this in to create the pattern. And this is what's nice, because now you can pick this up and you can see where your pattern is. And you want to make sure you can see it. You want it to be a little darker in the center where the Flirty Flamingo is. So you're going to blend a little bit more here. Okay, you can start to see the pattern. I think I'm going to go up just a little bit higher. And continue to add some layers on there. Until that center area is kind of how I like it. Okay, you can see those quite clearly now. So let's give it one more good coat up here. And I'm going to now lightly do the bottom area, because I wanted my colors underneath to be ombre from Sweet Sorbet on down. And we want this to also be ombre. But the trick is that this is going to be a reverse ombre. So I may have gotten this plenty dark here on the bottom. Could have been a little lighter. That's okay. Everyone is going to turn out different. And now what we would normally do is so how it's going to end up is you're going to go from a light to a dark, working this way with the background, but a dark to a light working with the pattern going up on the stencil with the stencil pattern. So normally what we would do here is we would take a spritzer and we would spritz this and then dab it with a piece of paper towel to pick up the ink from the top. But because, like I explained, this one has lots of spaces that are small compared to the wider thing, the water tends to want to go under these wider pieces, and it doesn't make a very clear pattern. So what I learned, if you have a stencil more like this that you want to use, one that's not equal in open versus off areas, is I found if I spritz my paper towel and I make it damp, and I'm kind of trying to do it away from the card. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to lay it over the top of my card and press down. And we've picked up some ink, you can see. Now, I will check it in between, and it's just starting to show up here. You can see a few little light spots, but not too much yet. So I'm going to spritz it again. I'm using a cleaner area because that did pick up the ink off from the stencil too, of course, and there's no point in laying that back down on there because we're trying to lift the ink from the top. From the sweet sorbet area, we're trying to lift the ink. So just kind of hold that wet and pick it up and then check underneath. Sometimes you will get some spots, that's okay. And then just slightly dab it to pick up any water that went underneath. And we're going to try this probably a few more times. This particular method takes a little longer than if you can spritz directly onto the cardstock, but it did allow me to use some finer detailed stencils, or stencils that maybe were not there. I got some really good pickup that time. So let's take a look at that. I think I had it maybe a little too wet, so I'm losing some of my pattern, but you get the idea. That's how it goes. I might have had some water under there. So let me show you the finished card. And I probably took my time a little bit better. If I come up here close, I hope you can see that we have light pattern, medium pattern, and up here on top is a whiter pattern. Bring that around. This stamp set is one of our retiring stamp sets. Sadly, it's one of my favorites, called Nature's Harvest. And this has some of the Sweet Sorbet Glimmer paper, which is also on the last chance list. The stamp set's on the last chance list. But you can see the technique here, and that's my card using that particular color and idea combination. Here you can see my scrap piece that I used to decorate the inside after I trimmed it. So now let's go ahead and try it with the stencil that I said worked best. So I'm going to clean off my little clipboard here. Get this stuff off. Let me just spritz some water on here to clean this up. And I'm going to show you with this retired stencil the way that I was taught to do this technique, as opposed to dampening paper towel and blotting. This one we're going to spritz directly onto the cardstock. So there, we've got that tied down. And here again, I'm going to line this up so I like it. And add some, it moved a little bit. Probably doesn't matter since I'm going to trim it anyway at the end. But, okay, so now we are going to use Starry Sky and Tahitian Tide from our current in colors. Get a couple clean blending brushes. And we're going to use the same process. I do have a larger piece, so this is, I may or may not do the whole thing. We'll see how it goes. Let's get the top Starry Sky. This is a nice dark color, tends to work very well with this technique. Any dark, intense colors, like I said, seem to work best for me. You can certainly try the other ones. This is a technique you're probably going to want to play around with a bit, practice, try different stencils that you have. See which one works best. I have seen them use, I'm using similar colors in my ombre effect, but I have seen samples where they used like an orange and a yellow and made kind of a sunset pattern, which was really pretty. The most time-consuming part of this is just laying down blending your ink on. Okay, that's about, maybe I'll come down just a little bit further. Again, I'm doing it roughly in thirds. Okay, that's really nice and dark. So let's go ahead, close that up, this color out of my way, and bring in Tahitian Tide. And I'm going to do the next third with Tahitian Tide, and then we'll just blend it down like we did before. And again, you do like to kind of blend them into each other a bit. With this one, I almost found it was easiest to come back after with my Starry Sky and blend it in, because when I was going up into the Starry Sky with this blending brush, I was picking up a lot of the Starry Sky on my blending brush, and it wasn't really my objective to do that. So we'll come back and blend it in a little bit more. I may not get this, I may have not gotten this one exactly in thirds, but that's okay. You do want to make sure also that your ink pad is pretty juicy and wet, just to save some time. I think my Tahitian Tide could probably use a little ink about right now. I should have inked them all up before I started, but I didn't. There's always something I forget to do in my prep for these videos. It's always like, okay, each time, what am I gonna forget this time, and figure it out halfway through. So it is what it is, right? I can only do my best, and my brain doesn't remember everything as well as it used to. So okay, that's pretty dark for Tahitian Tide. I probably would like it just a hair darker, but we're gonna leave it. Now I'm going to do like I did with the first one, and I'm just going to take some swipes down to bring a little bit of color down into the bottom, just to get rid of the stark white. Not a lot. Okay. So I'm going to grab my Starry Sky and see if I can just blend this down. I think I have plenty of ink still on the blending brush. Okay, so that got rid of that white, most of that white spot. Okay, so this one we are going to do like I was taught to do it. We'll close this up. We will take our Tahitian Tide. Okay, so just stuck my thumb in the ink pad. It wouldn't be crafting day without inky fingers, would it? All right, so now let's blend our Tahitian Tide over the stencil. I'm going to try to keep this one a little lighter on the bottom than I did the last one. Let me check that. You want to be able to see it. Okay. And now let's just try to do this down here. Brush off my thing just a bit. I almost feel like I have a little starry sky mixed into my blending brush, even though I was trying to be very careful not to do that. Might just be the color I'm seeing on my phone too. Okay. So let's call that good. This time I am going to wipe this off a little bit. I did not do that last time. Normally I don't, and it really didn't pick up much ink, but just thought I'd try. So now we lightly spritz, and you just really want to spritz the top area. So I tend to lay a piece of paper towel over the bottom area because it's hard to control where water goes, as we know. And you're going to spritz lightly, not too much, and then blot. And every one of these is going to turn out different, so don't worry about that. You can see it picked it up pretty nicely from those diamond shapes. I think we got a couple drips that still leak underneath, which is not unusual. So just take a corner of your paper towel and clean that up. Looks like we could use just a little bit more, make that a little bit lighter. You want to be careful when you spritz not to get it too wet, because it will still run under that stencil. Not as much as if you have fine little lines on your stencil. This one is better. Okay, so you can see that is now picking up the other color quite nicely. You see how that's really starting to pick that up, and we can do that. I'm going to clean some water off the bottom up there. Like I said, it does tend to want to, water goes where it wants to go. So you want to spritz and then blot kind of quickly. You don't want to give it a chance to run around too much. So, oh, and I think that's really good. Blot that. Clean that up. Oh, I like how this one's turning out. This one turned out good. So, okay, let me pull off my stencil. Clean up my edges just a tad so I don't stick my finger in it. Can you see that one? This one does probably a little bit better demonstration. Like I said, this particular stencil seemed to work the best of all of them I have. I could have, again, done the bottom just maybe a little bit lighter because these are very similar. Sometimes you have a lot of ink on your blending brush and it's hard to tell. So it's a matter of experimentation, but it's fun. It's simple. And let me show you this card that I made using, and I used a different stencil on this one. This one I actually used the current artistic, the stencil from the current catalog. The one I showed you first, I used that for this card, which is this stencil. So I mixed them up today a little bit, but I tip it this way, maybe you can see. I think I actually like how this one turned out better. You can see the reverse water stenciling or the ombre in each direction a little bit better than you can with this one, but it's still a very pretty card. This is made with our Flowering Tulips, another stamp set. I'm trying to use my stamp sets that are going away, especially my favorites. It's so sad when favorites go away. A little bit about these flowers. The two outside ones were just die cut with the dies from the tulip dies, and then this was die cut from white, this was die cut from polished pink, and then I just sponged the edges a little bit, this one with the polished pink and this one with white crafting, to give a little variation in the tulip colors. This one is stamped with one of the stamps. So that's that card. Again, I used a scrap here on the inside, and you can maybe see the ombre effect, I hope. So let me pull in all my cards. That's the second one. The first one was our Nature's Harvest and Sweet Sorbet colors. And then my last one, I told you I did make one card with the this old retired brick stencil. And that was this card here with Desert Details. And on here, I used early espresso and crumb cake for my background. And I think you can see, sometimes it works better if I can get the whole thing in this direction. You can see that the bricks are light on the bottom down here. And here the bricks are light, but the background's dark. So it's just kind of a reverse ombre effect between the water stenciling and the blending on the watercolor paper. So that's that card. So those are my 3 cards today. I hope it came across somewhat clear on how to do the technique. I hope you will practice it. Let me flick my camera back over. All right, so let's hope you liked Faded Water Stenciling. It is a technique that will probably require you to practice a couple times. Who knows, maybe it'll be perfect your first time. Mine were not. And as you can see, some of them still aren't perfect, but they're still pretty. So I hope you'll give it a try. And Kathy will be back next week with something wonderful. Her cards are always so beautiful. And usually I see her technique and then I can't wait to go try it because many of them I haven't seen. So thank you for joining today. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channels. Click like or thumbs up. Give us a thumbs up. I guess it's called on YouTube. And Kathy will be back next week and I'll see you the following week. Have a great spring. Bye-bye.